What if the people you love most were quietly planning your death? What if every smile across the dinner table was a mask, and every goodnight kiss was a countdown? Tonight I'm telling you a story so twisted that even Hollywood would hesitate to write it. It is a story of love turned sour, kindness turned into leverage, and loyalty sharpened into a weapon. This is the story of Henry Walker, a man who rose from nothing to build a small empire, and the betrayal that ended it. It began, as these things often do, with something small and almost forgettable. A young man cutting through a vacant lot at the edge of a quiet suburb outside Cincinnati. It was late. The streetlights were thinning out, and the grass in the lot had grown wild. He saw what he thought was a bundle of rags tossed near a broken cinder block wall. He took 2 steps closer, then stopped, a chill crawling up his back. Those weren't rags. It was a body. He did not go nearer. He dialed the police with shaking hands and stared at the ground, too afraid to blink. When the officers arrived, they formed a small halo of light around the body. Forensics followed. There was blood, dried and dark, and head wounds that told a simple truth. The blows had been brutal and repeated, delivered by something heavy and unforgiving. The victim wore house clothes and slippers, a detail that nagged at the detectives. It suggested a man pulled from the comfort of home and dumped like garbage in an empty lot. But no one on that street recognized him. He carried no wallet. His face, though, spoke of age and a certain stubborn dignity. At the precinct, the detectives rifled through missing person reports. One file had been logged just hours earlier. A woman named Linda Walker had reported her husband Henry missing. A call was made. A car was sent. Linda arrived in a rush, her hair pinned back, her voice trembling. At the morgue, she took one look and collapsed into sobs. "That's my husband," she said. She pressed her palms together and whispered his name, as though the sound might bring him back. Detectives offered tissues and soft voices, but their eyes stayed quick and clinical. In grief, people sometimes talk too much. Linda did. She mentioned Henry's many business rivals, the deals that made enemies, the men who might have wanted him hurt. Her words painted Henry as tough, harsh even, but successful. A man who owned diners and bakeries, a man who'd come from nowhere and turned into somebody. She said he'd been on edge lately. She said tempers had flared at home. She said a lot of things that could be true, and a few that felt rehearsed. The detectives dug into Henry's past. The story they found was classic Americana. The son of a poor farming family shows up in Cincinnati in the early 70s with grit and calluses, opens a tiny diner on a tired block, flips burgers until midnight, and stashes each dollar until the place finally, miraculously turns a profit. More diners followed, a small bakery, some rental units. Henry Walker became Mr. Walker, the kind of man you shook hands with and then washed your hands after. He was direct, hard-nosed, often angry, and not particularly loved. Yet he could be loyal, especially to one man, Frank Miller, the night watchman who worked across from Henry's first diner. Henry paid Frank's kids' school fees some years, slipped cash in an envelope other years, and kept a seat open at the counter for Frank whenever he wandered in before dawn. Frank's family grew up in Henry's shadow. One of those children was Linda. Linda Miller was beautiful in that head-turning way that surprises small rooms. She was also ambitious, quietly, powerfully, relentlessly ambitious. She loved her father, but she hated the little apartment they rented, and the way groceries felt heavy in the hand when money was tight. She visited Henry's diner often, and over time Henry noticed. He was 20 years older. He had already been married, twice. He had children older than Linda. None of that stopped him. She made him feel like his life had a second act, one with brighter lights and a softer ending. By the mid-70s, Henry divorced his wives and married Linda. The whispers were cruel. The age gap was obvious, but Henry glowed, and for a while that light warmed everything. He bought her things. He bought them a bigger house. He bought a new bakery and put her name on the paperwork, once as a gift of trust. They had 4 daughters. He called them his 4 little lights, and on good nights he would laugh in the kitchen and scoop them all up at once, to their squealing delight. Time does what it always does. It scuffs the shine, breaks the rhythm, and presses on the sore spots. Henry wanted a son, a boy to carry the name, to inherit the keys and the ledgers, to stand in the oven's heat and say with pride, "My father built this." When it became clear no son was coming, something hardened in him. His temper, never gentle, grew harsher. Those kitchen laughs faded. He snapped more. He slept less. He watched receipts like a hawk and spoke to Linda through clenched teeth. The house, once soft with music and chatter, settled into a brittle silence punctured by arguments that began small and ended with slammed doors. Linda saw the writing on the wall. Without a son, without his mercy, she could end up locked out, divorced, diminished, an afterthought. She talked Henry into transferring one of the bakeries into her name. He did it reluctantly. She told him she'd pass it to their girls eventually. But after the papers were signed, she wanted more security, more guarantees, more of everything. The fights sharpened. The love thinned. What began as 2 people rescuing each other began to look like 2 people trapped. And in that trap, a thought bloomed. First like a shadow, then like a plan. Linda understood Henry's habits. She knew his routines, his hours, his shortcuts, the squeak of the back door, and the way he preferred the left side of the bed. She also knew 2 young men brothers who had grown up almost in Henry's house. Their names were Adam and Zach, and they had been Frank Miller's nephews who drifted under Henry's wing when they were barely teenagers. Henry had taught them to mop floors and balance tills and fix a squealing hinge with cooking oil. He had treated them, God help him, like family. Linda invited Adam for coffee one afternoon when Henry was out. She spoke softly, like a mother. She told him she knew about his crush on her oldest daughter. She told him she could make a marriage happen. She told him families protect each other, especially when a man has turned cruel. Adam listened. He nodded. He said he loved the girl. She told him love needs courage. Then she told him the price. Adam couldn't do it alone, he said. He would need his brother. Zach came by the next day. He was sharper, colder, more practical. He asked for money. Linda named a number that took his breath away. Then she added a promise. Once Henry was gone, everyone loyal to her would be taken care of. The house would be safe. The bakery would be secure. Her daughters would have futures. All it would take was one terrible night. She did something even darker. She pulled her daughters into the fear. She whispered that their father was planning to cut them out, that he had older children elsewhere who would strip the house bare and sell the bakery and leave them with nothing. She reminded them of the nights he yelled, of the plates that cracked, of the way his face looked when he didn't get a son. Fear changes the color of the world. In that color, wrong can look like necessity. The night came in late autumn. The air outside had the first bite of winter, and the house seemed to shrink against the cold. Henry came home later than usual, muttering about invoices and lazy staff. He ate dinner in silence and went to bed early. Linda waited, sitting rigid at the kitchen table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the hallway clock. When the house settled into its familiar creaks, she stood up and walked, barefoot, to the back door. Adam and Zach slipped inside. Linda handed Adam a length of metal pipe she had kept hidden beneath towels in the laundry room. Her face was pale but set. She nodded once. Adam swallowed hard. Zach looked at the floor. They moved down the hallway. What happens next never fits neatly into words. Violence rarely does. The door eased open, breath held. The moon edged through blinds. A sleeping man turned onto his side, the fabric of his shirt whispering against the sheet. Then the first blow, savage and stunning. The second, heavier. The third, desperate. In those final seconds, the long arc of a man's life, the boy who left the farm, the diner that smelled of onions and coffee, the paycheck stuffed into a pocket to help a friend, the laughter of 4 little girls, shattered beneath metal and rage. It ended quickly. Silence filled the room like smoke. Linda stepped in and stared. She touched the back of her hand to her mouth and nodded again, businesslike, as if confirming a delivery. Together they wrapped Henry's body and carried it out the back, down the short driveway, past the dark fence, into a waiting trunk. They drove to the vacant lot at the edge of the subdivision, the same lot where a young man would later make a phone call with trembling hands and left Henry there. Back at the house, Linda worked with a cold efficiency that startled even herself. The daughters brought rags and bleach. They stripped the bed, flipped the mattress, scrubbed and scrubbed until their arms shook. By dawn, the house smelled like a hotel room, clean, impersonal, ready for a story that would not be true. At mid-morning, Linda walked into the police station with eyes already rimmed red and filed a missing person report. She spoke quickly, almost breathlessly, about business rivals and the late nights that worried her and a husband who had been so stressed lately. She wrung her hands. She asked for help. She played the part. It might have worked. It often does for a time. But detectives live with lies the way fishermen live with weather. They can feel the change in the air. One small detail didn't match another. A timeline that should have been simple nodded where it should have been straight. A neighbor remembered a car door closing. A daughter said something she shouldn't have known. And the body in the lot, dressed for sleep, kept whispering its truth. This did not happen out there. It began in here. When the detectives brought Linda back in, their voices were softer than the first time. They asked if she was sleeping. They asked how the girls were. They let silence sit in the room, heavy and patient. Silence can crack even the strongest plans. Linda's breathing changed. Her hands moved to her lap and stayed there, still as stone. She blinked long, slow blinks, and then, like thin ice giving way beneath a footstep, she broke. The confession came in fragments at first. She had been afraid. He had been cruel. She had to protect her daughters. She didn't swing the pipe. She didn't drive the car. She only gave a signal. The detectives didn't raise their voices. They let her talk. They let her explain kindness as strategy, fear as logic, murder as mercy. When the words finally stopped, what remained was a terrible, unalterable shape, a wife who had planned her husband's death, 2 brothers who had taken the job, and daughters who had helped hide it. The arrests followed swiftly. Adam and Zach were picked up before dinner. The daughters, stunned and pale, were led out of the house that had felt safe that morning and foreign by nightfall. The town watched, first in whispers, then in headlines. People came to the courthouse steps in sweaters and windbreakers, clutching coffee cups and theories. They remembered Henry as a bully, a benefactor, a self-made man, a fool for love, depending on whom you asked. They remembered Linda as the girl who married up and the woman who kept her chin high in the grocery store aisle. They remembered the daughters as giggling kids in matching backpacks. The trial was quick, like a fever that burns hot and then breaks. The prosecution laid out the timeline, the motives, the money that changed hands, the promise of a marriage offered like a door prize. They showed the pipe. They showed photographs the jury looked at for as little time as possible. Linda's attorneys tried to paint a picture of desperation and abuse, of a woman cornered by a man who could be cruel. But the jurors didn't see a corner. They saw a plan. They saw the careful lies told to daughters whose fear had been cultivated. They saw the manipulation of 2 young men Henry had once sheltered, Sentences were read in a courtroom so quiet you could hear a heel scuff the floor. Linda, guilty. Adam, guilty. Zach, guilty. Two of the daughters who had helped conceal the crime faced judgment of their own. The words fell like stones into a deep well. Some cried, some stared. Outside, the air was bright and deceptively fresh, as if the town itself wanted to pretend none of it had happened. In the end, the story of Henry Walker wasn't about business rivals or late-night deals gone bad. It wasn't about the pressure of success or the myths we tell about self-made men. It was about something smaller and darker, the corrosion of a family from the inside, the slow turning of love into leverage, and the quiet, devastating power of fear. Henry had spent his life learning to read a balance sheet, to count costs, to hedge against risk. But there is no ledger for trust. When it breaks, the loss is total. If there is a lesson here, and there may not be, it is this: betrayal rarely begins with a blow. It begins with a story we tell ourselves to survive a moment we think we cannot bear. It begins with a justification that sounds almost noble in the whispering dark. It begins with the tiniest tilt of the truth, until one day gravity takes over and everything slides the wrong way. Imagine that kitchen again, before the arguments, before the plans. A man with flour on his forearms lifts a little girl, then another, then a third and a fourth, all of them laughing, all of them certain the world is safe because dad is strong and mom is smiling, and the air smells like cinnamon and butter. For a moment the picture holds, then time does what time does, and by the time anyone notices the crack, the house is already leaning. Henry Walker's empire did not fall to a competitor or a market crash. It fell to the quiet click of a back door, to the creak of floorboards in a sleeping house, to the weight of a metal pipe and a promise broken the instant it was made. That is why this story lingers, not because of the violence of the end, but because of the ordinary way it began, with love, with hunger, with hope. If you've listened this far, know this: the most dangerous betrayals don't come from strangers on dark streets. They come from across the table, from the familiar voice that knows exactly which words you'll believe, from a hand you've held 1,000 times. And that is what makes this story unforgettable, because in the quiet spaces where we feel safest, the sharpest knives can hide in plain sight.